freeze. Now, for many decades since its founding in 1961, USAID's impact in the Caribbean region primarily focused on building resilience to climate change, addressing environmental threats like marine degradation, reducing youth crime and violence, improving health outcomes, and supporting economic development by strengthening local communities and institutions, particularly in areas like disaster preparedness and sustainable tourism practices, all while working to mitigate the impacts of natural disasters like hurricanes through infrastructure development and community engagement. Of course, history would record that USAID, in the context of the devastation wrought by Hurricane Ivan in Grenada, provided significant assistance towards Grenada's recovery from both Hurricanes Ivan and Emily. Now, since the incoming far-right Trump administration announced plans to freeze USAID funding, the International Organization for Migration told Brazil, for example, that it was suspending work on a program that helps connect Venezuelan migrants in the country with employment opportunities. The Colombian group, Institute for Studies for Development and Peace, which monitors violence against rural communities, said that it would terminate the contracts of several team members. News of the aid freeze sounded alarms with the region's humanitarian and nonprofit sectors, and some Latin American and Caribbean policymakers argued that the stoppage ran counter to the administration's stated goals, such as reducing undocumented immigration to the United States. Now, the types of programs currently paused include anti-gang units that assist governments in the region in investing in and the trafficking of leaders of crime. For example, the MS-13 group, who are directing criminal activities both in Central America and the United States. But what impact would this funding freeze have on the Eastern Caribbean? And here to make sense of it all is economist Dr. Patrick Antoine, who is currently based in Trinidad, but a Grenadian at heart. Dr. Antoine, welcome to this week's edition of the Bub Report. It's good to have you again, sir.
Great morning to all your listeners, and it's good to be with you again on the program.
Yes.
I'm sorry that I missed Wudimaya.
Yes.
I was doing what I'm called upon to do by forming common cause with my brethren at church. Yes, man.
Dr. Antoine, it's so good to have you again. I hope you're having a happy new year. And perhaps, were you in Grenada for independence, or did you participate in independence activities elsewhere?
No, elsewhere. I would have liked to have been, but we are in the midst of all sorts of preparations for meetings. But I did celebrate in my own way, and I did, in fact, form common cause with my brothers and sisters in Grenada by keeping in contact.
Excellent, excellent. Now, Dr. Antoine, let us go on to this USAID conversation, very important conversation. Now, let us first talk about the impact of ongoing USAID projects in the Caribbean region, not only in respect of the dollar amount, but in the sectors that benefit from USAID funding.
Yeah. So the impact on the Caribbean at this time is obviously going to be significant, if only because it's not only the fact that the projects, so to speak, that depend on the USAID's funding directly have been impacted, but it's also the fact that many of the projects pull in counterpart funding. Yes? Mm-hmm. So that that's the first thing I want people to understand, so that the impact is larger than just the monetary impact from USAID. It also has to do with many of the other institutions that now are questioning whether they can fund the gap or whether it makes sense continuing with the project. So we're going to have impacts, for instance, as you well know, on some of the infrastructure projects. But I want to talk about the shift that we saw with USAID more recently in funding private sector activity in the region. And in that context, certainly projects that deal with private sector activity in the agri-food sector, which deals with food security, projects that deal with resilience in terms of building resilience to natural disasters, projects that deal with just micro, small, and medium-sized enterprise structuring, projects that deal with financing, providing financing on a scale-up basis. So, for instance, there is a project that we're involved in, and although the USAID is putting in, let us say, a factor of 1, what we're looking at is a sort of end product with a scale factor of 20, what we call a 20 times, right, the injection. So the impact is going to be significant for the region, and in the instance of the projects that we know of, where, for instance, you have projects that are also co-funded with resources from the IDB, with resources from governments, with resources from NGOs. Those are going to be impacted quite negatively as a consequence of the pullout. I see. Are you hearing me clearly? Because
yes, I can hear you clearly. Yes, go ahead, sir.
Yeah. So I think the impact is going to be quite strong, and it's untimely too. For instance, there are 2 projects that we have. One is Reset, and one is another program which is focused on agriculture, which draws on the funding that was given for sort of building food security in Ukraine. I carve out about $46 million. So that's come to a halt, untimely, because we had just sort of mobilized the private sector in the Eastern Caribbean and Guyana, Suriname, and so on, Trinidad and Tobago, and Belize. We just mobilized the private sector themselves to get involved, and things were just at the stage where they were about to take off. The impact on these projects, for instance, in one program, we're talking about 2,100 small businesses that will be impacted directly because those projects have come to a halt. So it's going to be a significant impact, but it's also going to be an impact in terms of crime and security. And of course, the region's engaged in one of the worst sort of crime waves that we've seen. It's not crept up on us. It's been coming for a while, but there are several programs that benefit from joint funding from the United States that dealing with the causal factors of crime and let me just say criminality in our region, so that things such as transnational crime and smuggling, those programs are going to be impacted. Programs dealing with firearms and interdiction, those are going to be impacted. Programs dealing with surveillance and trying to get sort of building the intelligence to address crimes, those are going to be impacted as well. And so I think for us, we're still trying to get a good handle on what the true impact is, but it is in fact going to be significant for the region for the reasons I mentioned.
Very well. Now, the historians, especially those of a particular global South epistemology, have argued that USAID's work in the global South, in the Caribbean, in Africa especially, is a sort of an extension of U.S. imperialism, and that there are also those who would say, well, we have not really grown from aid, we have not really benefited from aid. That what foreign aid has done historically is that it kept us in this developmental abyss without allowing us to have the resilience and the independence and the wherewithal to get out of that abyss and carve our own resilient, and I hate to use this word resilient, I think it's become overused in many respects, but that has been the argument. Now, is that a view that you also subscribe to? I suspect you don't, given the plethora of projects and programs that you've just articulated here that benefits from, in spite of American imperialism. I suspect that the USAID would be one of those things where the US, in many respects, projects that type of soft power.
There's no question that when countries give donor resources, and I'm cautious with the word just aid, donor resources, that they also have other objectives, strategic objectives that they intend to be fulfilled by the grant of those programs, that donor assistance. I think we'd be naive not to understand that. So that is the case with the United States. It's the case with China. It's the case with all other countries that give us the donor assistance. Even our brothers in Cuba, and there is this reciprocity too, that we also benefit from this because we live in a hemisphere that is rather integrated. So that's the first thing. So as we've come from the old sort of ideology which talks about imperialism and so on, I think the world has changed. And I think a lot of this now depends on us. So for instance, increasingly, developing countries, the global south, has an opportunity to help shape the way that programs are developed and the way programs are also delivered. So for instance, take the programs in the Caribbean as one case in point. We had a significant program which was actually being led by Sandyford Edwards. People know him as Rural Edwards. Sandyford Edwards from Grenada. And what he's done coming from CARICOM institutions is that he was able to significantly sort of orient and design the way in which these donor funds would be programmed. And I think that's healthy. So I think there's been a shift. It is not a complete shift, and we're not naive. I think all the countries expect something in return. But increasingly, too, a lot of the intellectuals and the capacity and the persons that are being hired to deliver these programs do have a philosophy that is quite different, and it allows us a freer hand in helping to shape, not totally, but increasingly, the programs and the outcomes that we are going to be, in fact, that we desire. And many of these are in keeping with our national development programs and with, of course, the trust by the community. So no, I've given you a long-winded answer to the question, which you're absolutely correct. I don't entirely agree with at all. I don't think it's as simplistic as that.
No, absolutely. I would agree with you there. Now, in respect of, and of course, we have a question from Nicole James Phillip here, who's saying, I wonder what was some of the tangible benefits from those projects mentioned. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so I'm happy that you begun very transparently and in a balanced way by mentioning the assistance we got during Ivan.
Yes.
Because I had the benefit myself of playing a very let me say integrated. I want to use the word integrated with the team role with the recovery from Ivan and the United States Agency for International Development through their various programs, and also the other agencies of the US government did in fact play a strong role in the recovery from Ivan, including the way in which we structured funds, which allowed us through, I think it would have been our Coordinated Agency for Recovery, ARD, to direct a lot of support to the private sector in all facets of the economy. That's a good example. In the program that we're involved in now, what we're doing is essentially dealing with small and micro enterprises, youth, women, and we're dealing with indigenous groups as well. So we have, for instance, the Cardinagros. We have other groups that we're dealing with that are ordinarily not able to access capital easily. And we were just at the stage where we had sent out, as it were, a call for proposals. And the call for proposals were being responded to by a number of groups that had organized themselves through cooperatives, and many of them are also entities which have no more than sort of $100,000, $200,000 in capital, but they're trying to get access to up to $500,000 in capital. And they are using these resources to finance their own projects that they've developed, which has tremendous impact on each of the economies. So again, that is something that I think is quite useful. And of course, the support in crime and security is substantial. The information on transnational crime is something that I think is of benefit to all the countries, and CARICOM continues to need that kind of support if we are to deal with the wave of crime including the shipment of guns coming from the south. We don't often speak about this, but also coming from the north.
Yeah. Yeah, and the president of Mexico made a very valid point. Now, the bellicose rhetoric from the White House occupant seemed to scaremonger people from the global south. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they are, quote unquote, infesting American society in respect of things like fentanyl, illegal immigrant, undocumented immigrant crime and things like that. And the president of Mexico made the point that if there was not a demand and supply dynamic from the United States, then perhaps these issues would not exist. In fact, the guns are manufactured not in Mexico, they're manufactured in the United States, right? And so I think it's important to also make the point that in the United States, we have a vast Caribbean diaspora of tax-paying American citizens who contribute to the public purse of America. So when Grenadians and Caribbean people say, well, they should not care about the Caribbean, well, a lot of those funding, a lot of USAID funding comes from proceeds from our tax-paying dollars here in the United States as people in the diaspora. So I just thought I needed to make that point there as well.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And I think in an integrated trading world in which we now live, the United States is our largest trading partner. So the US accounts for about 52% of all our trade in goods, and they're a significant investor in the private sector activities in CARICOM. They're one of our largest sort of originating markets for tourism. These are all significant indicators of the highly integrated nature of our region with the United States. And of course, you know that remittances play a large role in a lot of these economies, such as St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Belize, Jamaica, and also Grenada. We have a listing of those countries where remittances play a significant role in terms of the order of importance. So there is no question that the interest of the Caribbean countries that essentially form the third border ought to be taken into account by the administration. But here's the thing. Two things. One, the US people voted for the administration that's in the White House. We have a policy, I think, as certainly Caribbean countries and the people who live in the Caribbean, of non-intervention in the domestic affairs of other states. So there is essentially two sides, and I'm agreeing with you on the two-sided argument to this. One is that, yes, we have some reasonable expectation. The word is reasonable expectation that countries will act in a particular way, given the sort of, the integrated way in which I think our societies are, trade, economics, etc., etc. But the other part of this is really the administration of any one of the countries in the hemisphere have a right, when they're voted into office, to administer their own policies in keeping with what they think their own domestic
priority objectives, the domestic objective. Yes,
absolutely. So I think, again, you are right. There's a lot of rhetoric going around, but I think we have to be very realistic about this. And I make the point that it's a pause, and I'm certainly, from the tone of my voice and from the arguments, you would hear that we've been affected in a major way, the organization that I have the honor of leading. We're hopeful that as this thing sort of settles, that the programs that do have a positive impact, certainly on the mutual relations of the countries, that contribute to growth, that contribute to equity, that contribute to trade, that contribute to integration, that contribute to social justice, that those programs essentially are allowed to continue. As you know, there is no secret, there is a strong concern by the administration about what they've called the DEI programs. We in the Caribbean have a different approach to that, and we don't apologize for it, because in our constitutions and in many of the societies, we've moved past that. And I think we need to be frank in speaking truth to power, right? We've moved past. And I think in that regard, it is now for us, Kellan, to step in and to demonstrate by our own actions, including our funding actions, that there are a number of these programs that are properly and fully part of our own milieu in terms of the way that we intend to develop our societies. We cannot go back, and I say so openly as a Christian, we cannot go back to some of those days where we start excluding people or excluding programs based on the, whether they're indigenous, right? Based on, other such indicators that persons have, including sexual orientation. And again, I know I'm on your program and I've just come from church, but I speak openly that I think we have to ourselves in our Caribbean societies double down on some of this. We can't go back.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, and I would say something, I don't usually, speak to my personal issues on the Burr Report, but, as someone who works in the academic space in the United States, as a professor, at a predominantly, I wouldn't say it's predominantly white, but there is, a significant white presence at the institution. And of course, now you hear these murmurs, is he a DI hire? He's an immigrant, he has an accent, and all of these things now are being used as weapons, really. When in fact, at the HBCU I attended, Howard University, we had to work twice as hard, right? And there's this idea that Black people we just get these things just because people have to fill quotas. Absolutely not. And I take strong exception to the way that this is being bandied about now. So I'm really glad you made that point. But Dr. Antoine, two final questions, and then we'll get to some viewer comments. Are you surprised that the way in which foreign aid has been used sort of as a weapon of projecting American power under the current administration, or has that always been the case? Is it the case that sort of the disguise and the mask is off with the current White House occupant, because he just says what he feels, and of course, in many respects, he just, is very politically incorrect about who America really is?
Yeah, I think the truth is somewhere in the center. There's no question that there's more openness with the United States' foreign policy intentions for the hemisphere and, of course, for the world. I also think that the administration in settling its affairs, that they have perhaps pushed that agenda a little more aggressively than other administrations. And I think because the pause has been so sudden, I think we're tending to see perhaps the underbelly of how some of the administrations have functioned. Perhaps, another administration may have done it differently. But the truth is that I don't think that we can pretend to be shocked, Kellan. Even before the US elections, many of us in the region were already contemplating what a Republican administration where they've told us what they would do would look like. So, for instance, we're talking about USAID today. My colleagues will tell you that because we have a joint program which we think is very beneficial to the United States and to CARICOM that benefits from USAID funding, we were all contemplating what would happen to USAID funding if the Trump administration came into office and did exactly what they told us they would do. Now, they may have done it more suddenly, but I don't think any of us can be shocked by the fact that they are delivering exactly what they promised to deliver.
Mm-hmm. Yes, say what you want about the White House occupant. He certainly says what he means. and sometimes it's always difficult to read what he says as well. And of course, finally, now let us talk about contingencies. We have some viewer comments here saying, that certainly we have to look elsewhere. What are some of the contingencies? And of course, you indicated in your recent answer here that that is something that you've given thought to. Partners like yourself in the region have given thought to. What are some of the contingencies you can advise the nonprofit agencies, the people who work in the USAID sector, where can they go? Of course, right now we have the BRICS, and that is a conversation I would be bringing you back to talk about, because that's a conversation we'll be having. Of course, there is a pivot to the global south, which I really refreshingly love. So what happens now in context of alternatives? Where do we go for alternatives?
Well, look, I think the truth is that there is no easy answer to finding alternatives for these things. When you essentially pull the extent of funding that's been pulled, though temporarily, I keep going back to that point and being very clear that I think the way in which we engage this has to take into account that we are yet unsure about its permanence. And of course, we want to be able to engage to ensure that they understand that there are mutual benefits to a number of these programs and they ought to continue temporary. In the meantime, I think we're going to have to essentially use some of the capital that we have that's underperforming in our regions. And happily, certainly in the programs that we're involved in, there is a strong private sector orientation. For some of those programs, I think we're going to have to see how we can use, let me just say, capital within the countries and the region that does not benefit from perhaps high rates of interest. We're going to have to find bridges to make that happen. But many would say, listening to this, well, that's more medium to long term. In the short term, I think we're going to have to try to present these proposals to other countries in the global south. Happily, in the case of the CPSO and many of the other countries, including Grenada, we have reached out even before this development to our brothers and sisters in the continent. I had the opportunity of working with the Afri-Exim Bank in introducing them to the countries in the region. And we're going to have to be reaching out to institutions like that to see how we can develop programs that are win-win to fill some of the gaps that we see. But we also have to start leaning on some of the other relationships we have. And we've started doing that. The government of India, for instance, and institutions in the global south that do have, in fact, a common purpose, a common cause, a common vision with the institutions in our countries. I wish I could point you to sources of funding and say, look, you can go here or there. But even with the reduction in funding to the WHO, right, where we've seen Bloomberg step in, programs are going to be affected. So that the danger, I think, for us now is, first of all, to overreact in the short run, because we want to try to work with our partners to ensure that there is an understanding of what some of these programs are. But I think in the short run, there are no easy answers except the ones that I've mentioned, using some of the capital from our domestic institutions.
And Dr. Antoine, let us talk about the other geopolitical player in our region that's carving a significant footprint, and that is the People's Republic of China. Of course, one might argue, and I've been reading some research in that geopolitical context that speaks to how China plans to fill that gap, and they're probably salivating at the thought that now their influence will be so much greater in America's backyard, in the Caribbean and Latin America. And already they have been doing a lot of work around the Belt and Road Initiative. So in this period of sort of a schizophrenic American isolationist policy, while also carrying a big stick in some ways, will that redound to the benefit of the People's Republic of China?
I think wherever there's a gap, all of these powers that have an interest themselves in global influence and global dominance will in fact step in to fill that gap. And so it is not surprising that many of us believe that this creates an opportunity for the People's Republic of China to step in and fill the gap. And what makes that even more possible, if you followed my argument, is the fact that many of the projects that we've been talking about, particularly with the shift to resilience, right? Not just climate, but economic resilience. A lot of the private sector activities and actions. Those are investment oriented and infrastructure oriented. So I think increasingly that shift's going to favor relationships with capital from China that really is looking for markets at low interest rates. And I think that's certainly something that I think the US government must take into account in its sort of arithmetic of what this all means for their relationship in the hemisphere, us being at their third border. But I'm sure that in the cut and thrust of things, it will certainly occur to them that with a Guyana in the south and with a rising Suriname with oil and gas, that CARICOM is not a region that you want to essentially set free. The economic interest is deeply entrenched in the region. And I'm showing the cut and thrust of things, in addition to the matter that it creates room for China to fill. I think the United States themselves, I mean, these chaps are not silly. I think when the dust settles and the euphoria goes away, they would recognize that these are clear and present dangers that they must put into their sort of, let me say, into their calculus on where this will land.
I think I was muted there. Now, to piggyback on what you just articulated here, in respect of the CARICOM as a governmental institutional entity, Caribbean leaders, what should Caribbean leaders doing now to position itself to treat with any of the volleys that might be coming from Washington? I remember in the last administration of the current White House occupant, he summoned Caribbean leaders to Mar-a-Lago, and and he had them waiting to see him. I don't think all the Caribbean leaders went. Actually, some Caribbean leaders said that they would not be subjected to that type of indignity. I don't know if you remember that. And a bunch of Caribbean leaders went up to Mar-a-Lago and sort of kissed the ring, if you will, of this man. And so the question now we have to ask ourselves is, what will be, or what should be, the Caribbean region's approach in respect of tactically treating with whatever foreign policy volleys that he may come with, whatever threats he may come with, whether those are sanctions, tariffs, or whatever schizophrenic threats he might come with, depending on his mood on any given day.
So I think the CARICOM governments at this time must first of all go into deep reflection on how our strategic interests are impacted by the changes announced so far and the changes that we anticipate. This is not a small step. What I'm suggesting is that there really has to be, let me say, I'm not saying reflection, I'm saying analysis. The word is analysis, right? Economic, social, political, geopolitical. There has to be serious analysis, crime and security, of what this all means for our region. And I think that's certainly something that they ought to take the opportunity to do at the upcoming heads of government meeting between the 19th and the 21st. Having done that, the second most important thing for us to do as mature democracies, and I do mean mature democracies because I think compared to what we're seeing in the rest of the world, I think we are indeed blessed, and we've come far farther than we often think. As mature democracies, we have to engage. We have to engage. In short, we should be seeking an engagement with the United States once we are clear on what our strategic interests are, on how we're going to be impacted, and how we intend to advance our economic, social development or resilience in all respects. And let me say that I've always said that whether the United States administration recognizes it or not, right, this issue of climate resilience, and I've heard the rhetoric, but climate resilience joins us. Yes, when a hurricane passes Jamaica, passes Cuba, the next thing you know, you're looking at Florida, you're looking at the Panhandle, right? You're looking at the coastal states. So I think, again, it is for us to engage on those issues that I think we have this common interest on. I could say no more of that at this time, but we should set this agenda up and then seek a serious engagement on all of the pillars that I've mentioned. We should do that, by the way, before the 90-day pause, quote unquote, is up. We should seek to do that at the soonest opportunity, and we should seek to do that as a community, not country by country.
Very well. Tailor-made, good morning there. Saying good morning, everyone. I would like to hear Dr. Antoine's proposal to building the resilience of SIDS, that small island developing states, in the context of this conversation.
Yeah, well, I think in the context of this conversation, we have to recognize a couple of things. We have a SIDS declaration that was signed in Antigua. And I think that has the elements of a program that we ought to be working on as small island developing states among ourselves and also with our countries, partners, and groupings around us. So for me, this means that as SIDS, we have to try to deliver this agenda on social and economic resilience and climate resilience. So I think what we have to do is we have to be even more clinical. We have to take out our pencils, clinical about the climate resilience projects, programs, approaches, for which commitments have been made globally, but where the financing still continues to lag. But I think involved in that is us recognizing that we cannot any longer solely depend on the financing or the actions of others. So I think the SIDS declaration in Antigua now calls for us to eke out, to put our best minds to work, whatever financing we can to drive that development internally, recognizing, of course, that there's a broader responsibility, which we also need to lean on. But I think increasingly we're going to have to be able to bring more counterpart resources to that conversation. So that's economic resilience, climate resilience, social resilience. All of those pillars will now rely a lot more on what we can do amongst ourselves, and which is why the conversation on BRICS and the consolidation of countries in CARICOM and the consolidation of countries in Latin America and the Caribbean starts to play a greater role. I see.
Absolutely. Yeah, and Margaret Francis, and USAID contributed funds to quite a number of programs in the region over the years, and not just recently. It funded programs for crime reduction, police training, AIDS prevention. I cited Ivan because that was something that is most recent and that many listeners here are aware of. Ernesto Jose is saying that's the reason we have to open up our markets to the African continent and other countries as Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the Emirates countries, as well as Europe. And of course, we know that the European Union does a significant share of work in that space as well. Margaret says, it doesn't have to be a bad thing. Maybe it's an opportunity for us to look at our own strengths and start building our own. Let's go on to some other comments here. Margaret again saying, ever heard of the saying, beware of the Greeks bearing gifts? Dr. Antoine, have you heard of that saying? It's the first time I'm hearing that saying.
I also smilingly say, and also Grenadians bearing gifts. Yes.
Also Grenadians bearing
also Grenadians. No, but I think she's absolutely right. Look, let me tell you, CARICOM's promised to deliver an integrated capital and finance market for so many years since, let me say, it was sort of re-emphasized at the Grenada's declaration in 1989. We haven't done that. A lot of our people are investing capital in dangerous places and dangerous ventures because they just don't have options. The option of getting 1% at commercial bank is just not very attractive for many people. The rate of inflation outstrips that. We haven't done that. Many of the climate projects and projects that have climate elements, increasingly from the private sector, can give you rates of return that's north of 5 and 6%. But because we don't have the sort of instruments, let me say the products, and also sort of integrated CARICOM regime, such as a capital and finance market that's integrated across CARICOM, our people have been disadvantaged. So what's been happening is that because we haven't done as policymakers at the community level what we ought to have done, we've essentially made our people, by dint of the fact that we haven't given them options, become poorer and poorer over time. These opportunities, I agree with the person who made the comment, gives us a chance to deliver what we said we would have delivered, in 1989, in 1973, when we had, the original Treaty of Chaguaramas, etc., etc. Regional integration has a role, right? But whenever something happens, we run to it, and as soon as the sort of squeeze ends, the crisis passes, we go back to our own national.
We go back to, yes.
Right? And so I'm agreeing with her that the opportunity for us now, which is why I think there is a lot of momentum now at the level of the community to finally put on the table, right, developing an integrated regional stock exchange, which would give small enterprises an opportunity to pitch for funding on the junior stock market, as firms do in Jamaica. But we don't have that opportunity at home, as firms do in other countries. We don't have the opportunity well structured in Trinidad either, but they have a number of financing instruments because of the oil and gas that we don't have in our own space. But we now need to dig deep and do the things that we know, how to do. We've just put them off because it was easier, right, to open ourselves to funding from a number of the donor institutions, which is not bad if you still use it to leverage and to build in what you need to do. But in many instances, we haven't done that. So the caller's comments, I think, is absolutely spot on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And let us get to one final comment, and then we have to quickly move on to the next segment. We have Mr. Hector and Mr. Blash patiently waiting here. I hope I'm not taking them away from their lunch. I do apologize, gentlemen, for that. But Sir Alexander is saying it's rather unfortunate that Caribbean leaders have not been more aggressive in pursuing one Caribbean, one economy, one people, one currency. We are blessed with resources that can be galvanized. I'm sure that that's a sentiment that you stand by, Dr. Antoine, as well.
Absolutely. Prime Minister Motley recently said that, look, it was time for us to embrace this issue of integration in a more deliberate fashion. In fact, I would say about 10 years ago, our community made the unfortunate decision that the single economy, not the single market, which is the movement of goods and services, etc., but the single economy, building out the capital and finance space, dealing with single company registration, dealing with how we deal with mergers and acquisitions. They made the decision, for instance, that the economy component of the CSME was on pause, just incredibly. We didn't understand it as sort of academics and as professionals and officials in the space. But we're very delighted. We're delighted by the fact that Prime Minister Motley recently indicated that forget this pause thing. We're moving on to build out what we promised to build out, because now more than ever it's needed. Right? So I'm completely in agreement with that comment.
Dr. Antoine, before I go on to getting final comments from you, it will be remiss of me as a journalist to not ask, because I usually do. Is there any interest, sir, in returning home to the new National Party? There is new leadership in the party now. Is that something that's on your cards? Now, there's been some old reporting that you've been meeting with some of the your old friends in the, well, I don't know if I'm sure they're still your friends, but your old colleagues in the NNP. Dr. Antoine, is that something that is on the cards for you, sir?
One of the things that I think I'm known for, is my faithfulness and my loyalty.
Yes.
I am faithful and loyal to the regional private sector. Okay. I have the opportunity of leading them, and because of that sort of loyalty, where I represent the private sector across the community without regard or consideration for political parties domestically.
Okay.
I am completely, as the CEO and technical director, I'm completely dedicated to regional integration and to leading the regional private sector at this time. So that gives you an answer. But I want to also say the other thing. Man, I have continued to enjoy the benefit of communion, and fellowship, and friendship, and camaraderie relations with comrades across all shades of the political spectrum in Grenada. And some of my best friends are in the NDC. Some of my best friends are in the NNP. Some of my best friends are ex-ministers, as is well known. And boy, let me tell you, with being in the departure lounge, as many of us are increasingly, Kellan, I don't intend to give that up for the world. So the answer is I have never stopped. I have never stopped interacting with all of the players across the spectrum. I love debate. I love the exchange of ideas, and that is really something I hold profoundly to. And let me just say, I find it sad that increasingly we're losing that ability in our country.
Yes,
and
I agree.
It is sad that we're losing that. So
I agree.
whether it is Emlyn or Peter, whether it is Prime Minister Deacon Mitchell, who I've had the joy of sitting on the same side with as we battled on certain issues long ago, which were aimed at giving workers in the union a better stake in terms of arrangements. You know, whether it is my colleagues Toes, Lennox Andrews, I share common cause with all of them, which is aimed at building Grenada. We may have different views on how we do that from time to time, but I think I enjoy really the flexibility at this time of engaging with all sides. So that's really where it is. And I see
Mr. Thomas Wilbur is saying, Fred here is saying, why would he leave that private money and fight up with the politics? Well, I suppose you can do both these days. You know, you can just put some of your business in a private trust. Is that what they do these days? I'm not directing that at anyone. I'm just making a general observation, point.
Dr. Bob, I have tremendous regard
yes,
for the way in which you are able, just off the cuff, without much thinking, to throw these things out. And I wonder why, sir.
I have the gift of gab, shall we say. So Dr. Antoine, I will go over to you, sir, for some closing comments, sir.
No, I think one of your commentators is absolutely correct. Yeah. That we have an opportunity here to do the things that I think we have committed to, but we have not really taken the time because the the moment didn't force us to, in terms of deepening the work we need to do for ourselves, such as building out how we support our institutions, making sure institutions are fit for purpose, making them more results oriented, taking people out of poverty and having programs that are more oriented towards resilience, building out capital and finance markets, linking domestic markets and domestic money to opportunities regionally, making our poor people better off, making our economy stronger. And I think this gives us yet another. The word is not an opportunity. It's another opportunity to do some of these things. On top of that, the word is on top of that. The icing on the cake is that we also need to see how we engage with the US administration on matters of mutual interest to CARICOM and to the United States. That is going to take thought. Clearly, there are going to be some losses in terms of jobs in the short run. But I think the task for us now is to sit, think, and prepare to engage. And ultimately, I think that our region and our community is likely to be better off for it, because I think what this shows is that we now need to, not just in Grenada, but in the global south and in CARICOM, right, start working more amongst ourselves so that we can, in fact, make it less and less necessary to depend on international donor assistance. And that's really my last comment, but I really hold strongly to that. Yeah.
Dr. Antoine, thank you so much for appearing on this week's edition of the Bub Report. And of course, as these issues unfold, we will certainly, and in the context of BRICS, that is a conversation that I've been following and I'm very, very intrigued by. So I would also love to get your take on that for a future appearance on the Bub Report. So thank you again, sir.
Thank you. Cheers.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. Thanks for checking out the Bub Report's social media pages. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch our weekly live show, follow our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can catch repeat episodes on Wednesdays at 4 and 5 p.m. respectively on CRFM Radio and GBN TV in Grenada. We are also viewed on Sundays at 8 p.m. on WPG 10 throughout the Caribbean. Thanks for watching.